Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I stand before you today to bring back House Bill 21. House Bill 21, as many of you know, passed this chamber in the regular session on a vote of 134 to 15. What this bill does is it provides the first step in fixing school finance as we proceed along. As all of you know, one of the most important assets that we have are our children in the state of Texas. And simply put, this bill is the most important legislation, I believe, that we're debating during this legislative session. There's a long road. We've been spending many years on this. I was thinking back about it from my time on a school board member to the 4 terms that I've served on public education. And during those times, I fought to fix the school finance formulas. In 2006, the state was funding education at about 50%. Today, we're funding at less than 37%. The impact of that has been that the local taxpayers are paying more and more and more. This session that we've talked about it has been about property tax reform. You cannot have property tax reform unless you have school finance reform. That is just a fact. So, as we've been hard at work during this special session in our committee, in the Public Education Committee, one of the things that stands out is that Article 7 of the Texas Constitution is very clear. It says, a general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people, it shall be the duty of the legislature of the state of Texas to establish and make suitable provisions for the support of this maintenance of a free, efficient public school system. Members, many of you know that the Supreme Court had ruled and basically said that we have a Byzantine system, and we've said this many times. Our system may be lawful, but it certainly is awful. And so what this bill does is it takes the first step. And it takes the first step that I believe is critical to our schools. We have all gone back home after the regular session and talked to our chambers and our school districts, and they don't understand why we can't pass this bill. They don't understand why we can't provide an opportunity for our schools to be successful. They don't get it. They don't understand it. We passed this bill in April of this past year, and it sat and did not get a hearing until the last week of the session in the Senate. And we ran out of time. Well, we have the time to get this done. We just have to have the will to get this done. Now, as many of us have been called into the governor's office to talk with him about this agenda, I've had the opportunity to visit with him, and he put school finance on the call, and he did it for a very purposeful reason. He recognizes that we must take the first step. We as the legislature, it is our jobs to craft the policy. It's our jobs to be able to create the mechanisms for funding. But again, do we have the will to do it? This body, the House, has proven that we have the will. This body has proven that we have the opportunity. And today you're going to get that opportunity one more time. So let me tell you quickly what's in this bill, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Number one, in the basic allotment, as Chairman Zerwas had said, we've increased the basic allotment to $53.50. Included in that is $1.18 billion for transportation. We added $215 million for dyslexia. Rick Miller worked on a plan to identify children at a much earlier age this session, which we passed that bill. That goes hand in hand in 2013 when we passed a bill to identify how many dyslexic students we are, but we don't fund those students. So when we talk about special needs children, there's $215 million in there. There's $125 million for the bilingual allotment weight, $92 million in there for grade 8 CTE. Chairman Darby wanted the small district adjustment that we voted on this floor, and we put that and we left that back in there because that's important for the small schools. And then when we talk about ASETAR, the governor has requested that we put ASETAR on the call because we know we have schools that will fall off the fiscal cliff, and there's $200 million in for the hardship grants. Now, we also got rid of the hold harmless provisions from 1993 of $54 million, and I know that does negatively impact some of you, but round numbers, it's $1.8 billion that we've included into this plan. We believe, my members of our committee, and most of them are standing with me here today, and my joint authors and the people that have worked very hard on this. We've worked very, very hard on this. The first thing we did during the regular session for the first 4 weeks has talked about school finance. We've been talking about this for the last 7 months. In fact, when Chairman Aycock was chairman, we worked on it during that session. In 2011, I sat on a commission. 2013, I sat on a commission. 2015, we did 2 different panels, including a joint commission between appropriations and the House. I don't know how many more times we need to study this, but I know we know the right thing to do. So you'll have an opportunity today to vote on this bill, to go home and say that I support our public schools, that I have an opportunity to support the children, your grandchildren. We can debate the schematics of the funding mechanism. We've said it very clearly. We've done a deferral in 2003. We've done a deferral in 2011. And for those of you that are saying we just can't do that, and many of you weren't here in 2011, but I was. And the most important thing that we have is to be able to provide an opportunity for our children. Mr. Speaker, members, I want to have meaningful discussions with the Senate. I want to solve the problems. I don't want to be a roadblock. We want to be able to debate this. I hope that they'll take our olive branch seriously so that we can sit down and have meaningful discussions about this. 2 other quick notes. I plan to bring before you next week a resolution, HJR, that basically says that if our rainy day fund goes above $10 billion, the voters will have a right to decide that anything above that will go to fund any payments on the deferral or will go into the permanent school fund, just like we did for transportation. We've decided that we picked a number, and if it's above $10 billion, let the voters decide. Let the voters decide. If we're unwilling to spend the rainy day fund, if we're not willing to do that, by the way, that is taxpayer dollars. But if we're not willing to do it, then let the voters decide that they want to spend that money. That is their money. It should be spent on our most important resource, our most important asset. And finally, as many of you know, during the regular session, there was a school finance commission that was to be created. I killed that bill. And I did it because they weren't willing to have a discussion about actually education reform. We're here today to reform education. We want to take the first step. But we're also prepared to have that discussion on a commission. I promised the governor, I've talked to many of you about this. It'll be the 5th commission that I would serve on, and that's fine. And I'm happy to do that. But you can't have the one without the other. So I'm standing before you today, unless we get meaningful education reform in House Bill 21, I don't know what the point is of continuing to study this. Because we have to have the will. Another commission is going to tell us the same thing that we already know, that we need to increase the basic allotment, that we have to reduce recapture, that we have to make sure that our school districts don't close, that we have to create a fair, free, and efficient system in the public school system. And unless we're unwilling to do that in House Bill 21, I don't see the benefit of continuing to study this. With that, Mr. Speaker, members, I'm happy to answer questions.
Mr. Frank, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield?
Of course.
Chairman Huberty, thanks for your work on this. I just had a question for clarification on the way you are handling acetar. You're using a term, I guess, the
hardship grant.
Hardship, thank
yes.
you. So what is the difference between hardship and then we're going to be looking at another bill that takes all acetar
yes,
schools?
Thank you.
What is the difference?
Thank you, Chairman Frank. So what in 2011, when acetar was created in 2006, we said we're going to hold you harmless. 2011, the legislature said acetar is going to go away in 2017. So at the end of this year, it rolls off, it goes away. And at the end of August. But what we recognize is that because of declining property values and mineral rights and things of that nature, there are some school districts that are severely impacted related to acetar. Right. And so we looked at it and said we're going to create a hardship grant. The hardship grant covers anything that would be impacted by House Bill 21, including the hold harmless provision from 1993. And so what we did is we identified, so in year one we put $125 million to create a glide path for those districts so that they don't automatically get $1 million cut off of their budget. If we didn't pass this, if we don't pass that hardship provision in this bill, there will be school districts that will close.
So what is the difference between a hardship district and a district that is not a hardship under ASETAR? Because as I was looking at the ASETAR runs, almost all of the school districts that get money under ASETAR are already way above state averages,
Yes.
and most of them are at less effort. So I was hoping and thinking that maybe the hardship districts were the ones that were either taxing at or above state average, or were below average on funds.
Yeah.
Is that not what the hardship?
Well, you have to also remember that many of those school districts are also recapture districts. So even if they increase their taxes, there are school districts out there that if they increase their taxing maximum authority to $1.17, 90% of those funds would come back to the state.
Right.
So they can't even solve their problem themselves.
But
there are 10 school districts that are out there that no matter what they do from a tax rate perspective or anything else, that they theoretically could close if we don't pass this hardship grant.
Okay, so there's no difference really between the. I really.
Well, ASETAR. Let me explain it this way. ASETAR. If we continue to ASETAR as it is today, ASETAR would cost the state $335 million. We have a bill that we're going to talk about that going forward, and that's just an extension of it. What this does, ASETAR still goes away in 2017, but we create a glide path for those school districts that have that. So they have the opportunity. They're going to have to either dig into their fund balance, they'll have to go to their taxpayers, they'll have to make some cost reductions as we go forward. But if you have a school district that has a $2 million in ASETAR money that's coming into it for some reason, and we cut that off, and they can't even increase their tax rate to offset those costs, we wanted to create that opportunity to do that.
But
One of the other big problems is we're not using current year valuations when LBB does their analysis just because of the timing associated when taxes are out there. So as mineral rights continue to improve, the theory is that most of these school districts will continue to roll off of ASETAR as we go forward. So we just created a mechanism for them to be able to have a softer landing as they go forward. There's about 166 school districts across the state that it impacts. It touches many of you in different places that are out there, but it's very important for us to do this. This is one of the most important things that we talked about during our hearings.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative
would
Zedler
the gentleman yield for some questions?
Huberty,
Of course.
yield for question.
Yes, sir.
Listen, thank you for being here and bringing this before the House, and we appreciate it. But let me ask you this. When you started off, one of the things you talked about was that the percentage of the funding per student was roughly half and half or in the past, and now it's slowly where there's a greater and greater share of that percentage being borne by the local school district.
That's correct.
Right. Let me ask you this: is that because haven't we put more funds into public education every biennium, every budget? Hadn't we put more and more funds into public ed?
Mr. Zedler, it's a very I can give you a very detailed explanation, which I'm prepared to do about this, but the answer is no. What's happened? Let me finish. What's happened is that recapture continues to increase. So Representative Howard standing behind you represents a school district that's about to write a check for $550 million to the state of Texas in the form of recapture. You have school districts out there that are taxing at $1.17. There's almost over 400 of those school districts that are out there. Now, I have this debate with people all the time, and it's fodder that gets out there that says, oh, school districts are wasting money. Well, I've served on a school district, and I served during the tough times. And I've served in trying to figure out where are we going to cut resources, where are we going to get rid of people, where are we going to fire positions from. And it's very difficult to be able to do that. So what we've done, if you look at property growth over the years,
right,
what's happening is that the school districts, we're funding the growth of schools on the backs of the local property taxpayers. That's very clear. Now, we're not doing property tax relief during this legislative session. We may be doing some reforms, but nobody's going to see a reduction in their property taxes. This bill will provide an opportunity for school districts to actually provide property tax relief if they so choose, if their voters want them to be able to do that. There's no other bill that we've done that. We're funding less as we left this legislative session. We talk about this. We fund enrollment growth. Yes, we do. But we're funding less because, from a state share perspective, because of the recapture payments that are coming in, because of the property growth that's coming in. We're taking advantage of that. That was never the intention in 2006 when the original tax relief reform was created. And I will remind you of something. In 2006, I'm not sure if you were here at the time, I was not.
Yeah.
And you voted for the franchise tax. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, I don't know. But if you voted for that franchise tax, the intent was that it was going to create a window of between 12 and 15 billion dollars to be able to fund education. It's nowhere near that.
Right.
It's going to be around $3 billion. And so what we've done is we said to the school districts, look, you know, we're not going to help you anymore. You got to go to your local voters and get more taxes or more relief if you want to pay for these services. And many school districts have done that. Many school districts have taken that opportunity. But we're also doing it on the backs of places like Austin ISD. We're doing it on the backs of places like now Houston, which is now in recapture. We're doing it on the backs of places like Spring Branch and Canadian and places like that. That's who's paying for this. Facts are an indisputable thing. At one point, 50% of the cost of education was being funded. We are now down to 37%. The last lawsuit that was filed and successfully won against the state, we were funding 38% of the cost of education. We are below that right now.
Okay, but let me see. I want to make sure I understand you.
Yes, sir.
That is not because we hadn't every biennium put more and more money into education. What you're saying is that, like, for instance, the property tax evaluations have gone up. If the rate stays the same and the evaluations go up, that's significantly more revenue. Is that not right?
If the rates go up.
No. If the rate stays the same, but the property evaluation goes up.
Yep.
That's a significant increase in the amount of money coming in. Is that not correct?
Yeah, but it's at the local level.
Right.
And that
exactly.
reduces our share of the cost of education. Let me be very clear on something. When you hear, and I don't know how in depth that you've ever gotten into public education and the funding formulas and all the other things that are out there, but again, I'm happy to have this debate with you all day long. This is a fact. This is a fact. The state is funding less of the cost of education today than we ever have.
Okay, but
because we're putting it on the back of the local taxpayers. And we're talking about, we want to have property tax reform. You cannot have property tax reform unless you have school finance reform. And again, this is the first step on that. So if you are questioning the methodology of how we're getting there,
I'm not questioning anything. I'm just wanting to make sure we're clear on the facts. And has the percentage of the total that is paid for by the state gone down?
Yes.
Because we have not put more money into education? Or is it because the amount of money that is being raised locally has been raised dramatically? That's what I'm asking.
Well, Representative Zedler, I can give you the graphics that shows the declining cost of what we've done. The cost, we add 160,000 students a year to our school system.
Right.
Okay? So we are spending more on public education as a state between local and the state share. When you take out what we spent this year, which is the state share, is less than what we funded last year, meaning out of general revenue because of the recapture payments are coming in. We're taking those dollars, the recapture dollars were supposed to be brought out and then redistributed out to the rest of the school districts. We're not doing that. We're funding less and less of the resources that are out there. Did we fund enrollment growth? Yes, we funded enrollment growth. But the problem is
so the money is going out from the state, but then because of recapture, it's coming back. Is that what you're saying?
It's coming back in, and we're not redistributing those dollars as we're supposed to be doing. And I know Representative Howard's about to ask me a question about that, I'm sure.
Okay.
But it's very clear. Is the reason that we have school districts like mine, the ones that I represent, that are at the maximum taxing authority. I live in a fast growth area. We have an INS rate of 38 cents. We have a tax rate of $1.17. We have nowhere to go, even if we wanted to do it. Oh, by the way, we're ending up with 1,500 to 1,800 kids a year. We have to open up a new school at least every year to be able to keep up with that growth, to be able to do with that. And so people keep saying, oh, well, we just keep putting more money into the system. We're actually creating real reform, though, at the same time. All the things that we've done during this legislative session have all been about reform. And this is the first step on reform. I mean, we owe it to our citizens and our students and our taxpayers to go back and say, you know what, we're here for 30 days. We did something. We did something. If we want to fight about the mechanism to be able to do that, we're going to have that debate next week as well. But this is critical for us to take this first step. And then, as we get through this interim session, The governor wants us to pass this commission bill, which we are prepared to do. Representative King, Chairman King is working on that. We're being very collaborative on that, to pass that bill, to really study as we go forward, what's the cost of education index? We haven't dealt with that since 1990. We haven't dealt with any of these issues on what does it really cost to educate a child in over 30 years, nearly 30 years. So this is the first step in taking that to be able to deal with that problem.
So is this going to help us determine what it costs to actually educate a child?
Yes, sir. If we pass this bill, we're also going to pass the commission bill, and we're going to do an in-depth study to be able to do that. Now, and I think, Chairman Burnell standing back there, and we've talked about that. We've scratched our head and say, when you look at comp ed weights or the ELL weights and how much of it is, are we funding it at the right level? Many of these weights and things that were picked, they were just picked out of the sky. Back in the 80s and 90s, somebody said, how much, if you have an English language learner, the weight should be 0.25. Okay, well, that's great.
Representative Cortez raises a point of
Thank
order.
you.
Gentleman's time expired. Point of order is well taken and sustained.
Mr. Speaker, members, I hope that you'll support this. You'll have an opportunity to go home and say that you support your kids. I want to thank my staff, Amy and Molly and Andrea and everybody that's worked with us, our public ed staff, my vice chairman, all the members that have been input in this process, Dr. Zerwatz. And with that, I move passage.
Anyone wish to speak on for or against House Bill 21? Not the question occurs on passage third reading. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say record vote's been requested. A record vote is granted. The clerk will ring the bell. Have all members voted? Show Representative Giddings voting aye. There being 130 ayes and 12 nays, House Bill 21 is passed at third reading.